Alright, Jimmer here with a review of Axelay, a Konami release from back in 1992 for the SNES, but being played here on the Wii from the Virtual Console. And as you can see, it's a spaceship shooter, but unlike most shoot-'em-ups, Axelay has stages where the ship moves up, and others where it moves to the right. Also unusual is the lack of power-ups. Instead, the player picks weapons for 3 distinct bays before the start of each stage, and upon completion of the stage, a new option for each bay becomes available, and this adds a nice feeling of progress during the game. I never found the new missile upgrades to be much more useful than the initial one, which is pretty powerful and useful, but the laser options only get better as the game progresses, and the new option after the round Vulcan is very useful in one of the stages. And speaking of the round Vulcan, that's my favorite aspect of the game. Axelay was released well before the days of twin-stick shooters on consoles. The developers were able to design the round Vulcan's controls in such a way that the player can fire in all directions around the ship. So it fires in mirror angles at both sides of the ship, but the longer the fire button is held, the more the round Vulcan fires towards the front. And this is particularly useful when enemies are in tough angles to otherwise hit, and it grants the game quite a bit of strategy since certain weapons are more useful in particular situations. It's also pretty interesting how the different weapons play out in either the vertically or horizontally scrolling stages. You might have noticed that the graphics in the vertically scrolling stages look a bit unusual, perhaps a bit warped. Well, this is because Axelay is a game that would only have been designed for the SNES, because it makes use of the system's sprite scaling system, Mode 7, to some effect. And it takes a little bit getting used to, but I personally think it adds quite a lot to these stages, since it feels like you're flying over a roughly spherical object, much like flying in real life. I would also argue that Axelay's scenario, in addition to Mode 7 usage, was tailored for a console, since Axelay isn't so brutally difficult like your typical arcade shooter that is designed to just gobble up quarters. Rather, the game rewards you fairly frequently for shooting down as many enemies as you can, since the only power-up, if you will, is by gaining 1-ups for points. And I tend to get about 1 extra ship per stage, either from the level's enemies or from the bosses, which, by the way, check out how awesome this one is. I thought this boss design was neat for Star Fox 64, and I had no idea that this boss type had already been done years ago. Otherwise, the player has some advantages in that each weapon's bay will absorb a bullet and be unusable, though running into enemies or obstacles is still instant death. It's still an arcade-style game though, since level and boss memorization are a huge boon, and it's meant to be replayed. As for charm, well, spaceship shooters aren't really known for that, but there are some quirky elements like the pre-title cutscenes in which the pilot of the Axelay holds up this anachronistic pocket watch with a picture of his family, which is kind of unusual. I'm not sure if in the science fiction future whether people will still have those. And some of the names of the weapons are pretty weird, like the wind laser. I'm not sure how that makes any sense in space. Or maybe it's the wind laser. Even so, not sure what that means, but that's a pretty cool weapon in the game. So, Axelay, in my opinion, is an excellent console-focused spaceship shooter. It's probably my favorite for the SNES. The graphics are impressive, with massive, detailed bosses and settings, and the music too is great and has much more depth than is common for an SNES game. In fact, the only thing I don't like about the game is that it uses a lot of the sort of flicker, which is a bit hard to record for the footage, so there should be some extra bullets sometimes in this footage. In any case, it's highly recommended for shooter fans looking for a very impressive game that isn't brutally challenging. Well, have a good one.